Hello, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking all about the worst books that I read in 2022. Worst might be the wrong word to use here. It's just the word that I've been using for the past 4 years that I've been making these videos. But I'm going to be talking about the books that I really didn't like this year, my least favorite books. These books weren't necessarily published in 2022. They're just books I happened to read this year, and they're just books that I happen to deeply loathe and wanted to kind of share them with you so that maybe you can avoid these or maybe laugh at my choices if one of these books is your favorite. We love laughing at differing opinions, and that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna laugh at differing opinions. I'm not going to bitch in the comments about how I didn't understand your favorite book. Let's get into the books that I hated this year. First up, we have Husband Material by Alexis Hall. Now, this is one that could have easily made it on my most disappointing books of 2022 list, but instead made it here because with a disappointing book, I feel like there is the implication that you were expecting something from it. And while I really enjoyed the first book in this series, Boyfriend Material, it was a book that I read due to obligation rather than true interest in it. And that one ended up being a book that I really enjoyed. I think I gave that one 4 stars, and I read that one for a Goodreads choice word video. Actually, now that I'm thinking of it, I don't think it was last year, I think it was the year before. Regardless, I was kind of expecting something great here, but instead I got a book that was greatly awful. This book is about Luke and Oliver, who at the end of the last book are in a perfectly happy for now state. Luke is the son of a former model and a musician, and he has had kind of an interesting past. He has gotten into his fair share of breakups that have been kind of publicized, and he's kind of a hot mess, a lovable hot mess, at least that's what we think in the first book. He works at a nonprofit with a whole host of characters that we come to really love and laugh at, and he also enters into a relationship with Oliver, who is the straight-laced attorney that is the perfect foil to him, the perfect quintessential opposites attract romance thing. Now, I'm laying out the vibe of this first book so you can really understand the true character assassination that Luke goes through in the second book. This book, I think, is supposed to be about the discomfort that one experiences being in a long-term relationship, having to grapple with this idea of being single and having that freedom, but also enjoying the comfort, I guess, of a long-term relationship. And I think it's supposed to talk about the societal pressures that one faces. All of your straight friends around you are getting married, but you are gay. In this story, Luke is forced to attend many weddings and be a part of many non-gendered bachelorette parties, and he starts getting the idea that he might need to marry Oliver to legitimize their relationship in the eyes of their friends and family, and maybe in his eyes as well. And at the same time, he absolutely tears apart his partner Oliver, who doesn't seem to want things in the same way that he does. It's not that Oliver doesn't want to get married to Luke, it's that Oliver is unwilling to be as flamboyant and as out and proud as a result of the trauma in his upbringing, and Luke just seems to completely gloss over this and ignore it and harass him anyway. As one Goodreads reviewer pointed out better than I ever could, I have read depraved crime thrillers with serial killer antagonists who have softened me more than Luke, who is so unbearably, unforgivably selfish that I developed a Pavlovian ass-clenching response every time he has a conversation with or a thought about anyone, because I knew without fail that I would be exposed to the steaming landfill, sewage-strained biohazard bag of his inner and outer self. And that's the thing. In the first book, Luke is a character who is annoying as hell. He is someone that you're a little bit irritated about. You don't really love being in his head at the beginning of the book, but as he grows, you grow to really love him, and you enjoy the humor in the story, and you enjoy the way that he is tempered, I guess you could say, by Oliver as a character. But Luke seems to completely abandon all of his character growth that he goes through in the first book, and the way that he treats Oliver is pretty unforgivable, which isn't even to say anything about the fact that Oliver isn't even present in the first 20% of this supposed romance novel. I think what I came to realize when reading this book is that neither of these characters were very well suited for each other. It seemed like their lifestyle and the way that they conceptualize queerness was just incompatible. They could not be in a successful relationship, and yet we are supposed to believe that these two are meant for each other. This book was basically a worse version of the first book, a much worse version of the first book. And not only does all of that character growth get completely abandoned in this book, but we're also completely abandoning the plot of this book. There is no plot whatsoever, and the big thing that's supposed to happen in this book that I'm not going to spoil doesn't even happen. So at the end of this book, you are at the very same spot that you were at the beginning of this book. It's why did I listen to a 400+ page audiobook for absolutely no fucking reason, except for to listen to these two completely bitch at each other. This was supposed to be a book about domestic bliss and growing in the comfort of your relationship. It was not that. It was irritating. I didn't end up liking either of the characters by the end of the book, and frankly, I'm sad that this book exists. And I will point out here that I know that it's human instinct to try and find fault with others' dislike of one of your favorite things. I think that comes down to cognitive dissonance at the end of the day, but I got so many comments the last time I tried to talk about this book about how I was missing the point of the novel. This is a retelling of 4 weddings and a funeral, and to that I say, I don't care. I didn't ask. And you can't use the excuse of a retelling to explain away how bad a book is, unfortunately. So this was a 1-star read for me. All of the books actually on this list are 1-star reads for me, which is kind of rare. I feel like I normally am generous enough to give books 2 stars, but all the books on this list are 1 star, and I'm not going to say that anymore. I'm not going to say at the end of each book, hey, this is 1 star. You should just all assume and know that all of these books are 1-star books. Anyway, moving on to a book with a very different vibe, though it is in the same genre. The Takeover by T.L. Swan. Now, this book is really something different altogether. But it's also different because I didn't read this book out of obligation like I read husband material for a list video that I had to film earlier this year. I read this book in excitement because my subscribers recommended this one to me. And it wasn't just one subscriber that said, hey, you should pick this book up. I requested my subscribers' help to let me know what the best Kindle Unlimited romances are that I personally had not read, and this one got recommended time and again, and frankly, I do not understand it. This book is about Tristan and Claire, and it follows that kind of familiar formula that we've all come to expect from a billionaire romance. We have a richer than God, hotter than sin dude who swoops in to save a helpless heroine with insert baggage here. In this story, Claire is grieving the loss of her husband, sadly, dealing with the fact that she now has to raise 3 young boys by herself, all while trying to keep her deceased husband's business afloat. And unfortunately, it's not going so well, and she is offered a buyout/takeover by our high-powered hotshot businessman, Tristan. Claire initially denies his request to take over this company, but whenever they end up meeting again a couple of months later at a business conference, Claire ends up slipping into bed with Tristan and eventually relinquishing all control of her dead husband's company. But Claire is not the only one to walk away from this weekend with a lasting impression. Tristan ends up popping into bed with this lady, and after getting a weekend full of that sweet, sweet kitty cat, he decides that he is going to ruthlessly pursue this woman who is still very much in the throes of her grief. I had a ton of issues with this book. Let me try to enumerate them. Number 1, the plot was really uninteresting to me. The majority of this book is Tristan trying to convince Claire that she should give him a chance and that she should get over her grief and her trauma and be in a relationship with him instead. I mean, he is ruthless in his pursuit. I think he follows her home at one point, refuses to leave. It didn't really read as sexy to me. Number 2, the relationship that Tristan develops with the young boys in this story I found a little bit off. He has a decent relationship, I would say, with the 2 younger boys, one of which I think he has to really work on, and that was actually kind of sweet to me. It's the relationship with the eldest son that I didn't really like. The eldest son ends up going work for Tristan, which is not the issue that I had with that relationship. The issue I had was that that boy, I think, is a teenager, and Tristan was giving him a lot of relationship and dating advice, which included sex advice, and I don't think any of this was told to Claire. Claire was very unaware that these conversations were happening, and as a person who wants to become a parent in the future, I think I'd be pretty irritated if someone that I was sleeping with, I guess, offered sex advice to my child. I just think that's completely inappropriate and was pretty unsettling to read. And number 3, maybe the biggest glaring issue, the sex scenes. Lord almighty, the sex scenes. I know that there is a decent percentage of the population that believes that all on-page sex scenes are cringy. I am not one of those people. Clearly, I read a ton of romance. But pretty much every intimate moment in this book sent a cold shiver down my spine, and not the good kind. Case in point, the first time that these 2 have sex. Claire is expressing discomfort at her postpartum body, and Tristan responds in a way that I found kind of inappropriate and definitely got secondhand embarrassment from. Claire is expressing that she is just generally uncomfortable in her own skin, and Tristan decides that he is going to point out each of the things that he perceives her to be uncomfortable with. He talks about her stretch marks, he talks about her C-section scar, he grabs her lower belly, and I quote, "He grabs the little pouch of fat on my stomach and gives it a tug, and I smile against his lips." I mean, girl, I'm glad that you're into it, but frankly, I was deeply uncomfortable and had to very quickly skim that section of the book. Now, if it wasn't abundantly clear from how I've been talking about this book, there was nothing about this book that worked for me. This book was, maybe not the worst book I've ever read, but it was easily my least favorite or least sexy, shall we say, romance that I read this year. And it does have me questioning my subscribers' taste in books, I will say. I mean, thankfully, almost every other book that I read for that video was a success, but I'm watching you. My eyes are on you. Moving on to, I believe, the one book on this list that is not a romance, The Favorite Sister by Jessica Knoll. I read this book 3 days before sitting down to film this one, and let me just say, it had a very lasting impact. It had to end up on this list. This book is pitched as a story about sisterhood, and going into it, I knew it was a mystery thriller. I really expected this to feel like a Karen Slaughter novel that was going to be deep and nuanced about interpersonal relationships, right? This book is touted as being about the relationship between Brett and Kelly. Kelly is the successful, skinny, beautiful older sister. She is not the successful one when they are all grown up. Kelly has a daughter kind of young and ends up being a single mother, and Brett has a meteoric rise to success when she starts her own startup company and goes on a show about entrepreneurial women. I thought this book was going to be about the relationship between Kelly and Brett that was going to let us know why Brett ends up dead. At the beginning of the story, we find out that Brett does end up dying, and Kelly is on national TV, I think, kind of talking about her sister, and we're like, oh shit, what happened? And that's what I expected the book to be about. Okay, let's see this like really close-knit relationship, how things kind of break apart and why like maybe Kelly killed her sister. It is very much not that. This book centers almost entirely around this sort of like Real Housewives reality television thing, and is almost entirely centered on Brett and her relationship with these horrible catty women. And here's the thing, like if I wanted to read a book about reality television, I would pick up a chick lit book about reality television. I wouldn't pick up a mystery thriller about it. And frankly, there was no mystery here and there were no thrills here because we're given no breadcrumbs as to why Brett was murdered, why anyone would have beef with Brett. I mean, that's not true. I mean, we get to see how catty all of these women are towards Brett, but there's really no one person who stands out as like, oh, that's the suspect, like that's who we should suspect. God, it was mind-numbing, and it was long as hell. And not only is this book mind-numbingly dull and boring, we also get some of, I would say, the worst characterization ever. I'm not saying like it was poor characterization as in these characters were not very fleshed out, which is partially the case. My issue here is that these characters were fucking odious. They were horrible to read about, they were horrible to each other, and I get it's supposed to be like reality TV, Real Housewives, okay. It was very unsettling to read. Like, Brett is a plus-size character and she is allegedly a lesbian. We'll get to that in a second. Everybody talks about her so horribly. This book was written in like 2018, but everyone is calling her fat, saying horrible things about her to her face and kind of behind the scenes. And then we also have characters who lie about the fact that they were sexually assaulted in a memoir that they write, and yes, I guess they're called out for it, but like, what the fuck? And then we have Brett, who, okay, and I am going to spoil this book. Apologies if you were just desperate to read this. I'll leave a spoiler warning right here. Brett claims to be a lesbian and is not, and that is a major plot point of the book. She ends up like sleeping with someone's husband. What? I'm not saying this book is trying to condone queer baiting, but it was just deeply unsettling to read about these horrible, horrible people and the horrible things that they're doing, and then it lead to a very throwaway, like, oh, this is who murdered Brett. What? I guess I just didn't understand the point of this book. I think maybe if you're someone who really, really loves horrible characters with absolutely no redeeming qualities, maybe this book is something that you are really going to enjoy. I can think of a couple people off the top of my head who really like the Housewives franchise and like maybe they totally love this, but I like a little bit of like gray morality in my characters, or at least a little bit of nuance, and there was absolutely none to be found in this book. The characters are horrible, it was not fun to read, and it was also really fucking boring at the same time. How is that possible? Hell if I know. This is actually the lowest rated book on my Goodreads TBR when I decided to read it, and frankly I can understand why. Alright, let's get back to romance if we really want to call a book without a happily ever after a romance. Bad Luck Bridesmaid by Allison Rose Greenberg. This book is about Zoe, who is a cursed bridesmaid, and she is cursed because she's been asked to be a bridesmaid in I think 3 different weddings, and none of these weddings have actually taken place. And Zoe wonders if she has maybe had an impact on these impending nuptials not ending up happening. Zoe doesn't really want marriage for herself, and she's wondering if she's like kind of unconsciously told her friends like, hey, like maybe marriage isn't for you since it's not for me. And you think, okay, like maybe this is going to lead to some introspection, but obviously this book would be very short if that were the case. Instead, Zoe embarks on a mission to be absolutely horrible to everybody in her life, especially people who want to treat her well and just want good things for her. So this book is really bizarre for a few different reasons, and the first one is the way that this book is set up plot-wise. So the first, I would say like 40 to 50% of this book is all of these failed weddings and like why they haven't happened, and Zoe briefly thinking about how she maybe played a part in any of them, and she didn't really. Like, all of these people weren't gonna get married anyway. She kind of reflects on that a little bit, and then we get to see this like weird movie montage moment, I guess, between her and this guy she ends up not marrying. She is in a relationship, a long-term relationship with this guy named Rylan, and he's gonna come back into play later, that's why I'm bringing him up. They enter into this relationship, and he is very upfront about the fact that he wants marriage and children, and she's like, I'm not really sure about that, and I guess you could say she's upfront about the fact that she's unsure. But as the relationship kind of continues, this guy, I think is like 10 years older than her or something, and he's like, hey, like I'd like to get married and start my family soon, and he ends up proposing to her, she says no, and then she breaks up with him. He's heartbroken, she's heartbroken, and she feels like there's some unfinished business, which is perfect because later on in the book, she is going to go to her best friend's wedding where she's going to be the maid of honor, and she is going to come back into contact with her ex and string him along for a second time. We love to see it. And that is my second big gripe with this book. Not only is the plotting very weird, not only is it very tell and not show, especially in that first part of the book, it really hinges on the fact that Zoe is such a wishy-washy individual. It's very clear, honestly, though, at the beginning of the book that she really doesn't have intent to marry or have children. And you know what? That is perfectly fucking fine. I think that's awesome. I think you should do you. What is not cool, what is not very you should do you, is the way that she ends up treating Ryland as a result. She ends up, again, stringing this guy along, even though she's very, very certain she doesn't want to get married. And I could forgive it one time, right? But then at this wedding that she attends, she tries to string this guy along a second time. She knows fully that she does not want the same things as this man. And he is like, oh, okay, like if we get back together, if we have sex, like this is what it means. It means that like she's going to marry me. No, that's not what it means. It just means she wants to get your I guess, essentially. Or like she wants things the way she wants it and is unwilling to accept the fact that like you want marriage and that's important to you. Oh, it drove me crazy. I just think it's a disservice to women who don't want marriage or children, I think is really my big gripe here, right? Like, I think there should be more books with happy endings that don't include marriage or babies for women. Because I think there are a lot of women out there who don't want those things. I do, but that doesn't mean that you need to. And I just think that having this portrayal is a total disservice to women who want those things. And yes, you can discover these things along the way. Again, it was very clear that our heroine, like, she knew what she wanted, and yet she wouldn't be honest, and yet she was a total dick to everyone around her. Oh, it irritates me so much, and it especially irritated me because I listened to this audiobook on the way home from my own honeymoon. It just pissed me off. Moving right along. Actually, a book that also was not a romance, My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh, I believe is how you say her last name. I felt very uncool adding this book to the list because I feel like all of the cool girls I know really liked this book and recommended this book and said it was like so different. And I'm not a literary fiction girly. I have never claimed to be an intellectual, and I feel like that really shows when I talk about this book and just like why I didn't enjoy it. But let me just tell you why I hated this book, okay? Maybe you'll agree with me, maybe you won't. You're probably gonna comment in the comments that like this is the best book ever and I'm fucking stupid. And you know what? You're right. But I can still talk about why I didn't like it, right? Okay, so this book is about our unnamed narrator, and as the title of the book maybe implies, or maybe tells you verbatim, this book is about a year of rest and relaxation for our very waspy, very beautiful, very entitled heroine. She has a perfect life, right? She like works in an art gallery. She has kind of a weird, shitty boyfriend and a best friend who is kind of irritating, though a little bit lovable. But she needs to escape her life because of the trauma in her past. I think her parents have passed away, and just other like bad shit is just piling on. So she ends up seeking out a psychiatrist who will prescribe a bunch of tranquilizers so that she can essentially like sleep for an entire year. She does wake up to eat and stuff, you know, like she's not entirely like in a coma or anything, but yeah, she just like wants to escape her life, and I guess we're supposed to learn some sort of like profound lessons from this. Did I learn anything? No, except for that this author really likes playing with timeline, and we'll get to that, okay? Beyond the ending of this book that really had me abandon any hope of enjoying it, the bulk of the story I just felt didn't really work. I wanted to really like lean into the catty commentary of our heroine. I wanted to like really put myself in her shoes, but I just feel like there wasn't enough exploration into the things that made her go to this place, that made her want to completely erase a year of her life. I mean, it's like deeply relatable as a depressed person, but like I want to relate more to you. I want to understand the reasons why you're doing this, and I feel like they were never listed or explained in a way that made sense to me. I just like didn't give a fuck about this girl, and I was like, why are you treating everyone around you so shitty? I mean, it made sense, like, I don't know, it's like I wanted to care about the cattiness, I wanted to like lean into it, and I just couldn't. Instead, I was just like rolling my eyes the entire time, and then we get to the ending. Okay, this book is set in the year 2000, and I am going to spoil this book, so again, here's a spoiler warning if you don't want to be spoiled for this book. You know what happens in September of 2001? That thing happens to our main character's best friend. It is the finale to this book. It's what kind of causes her to wake up, I think. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, her friend is tragically killed in 9/11. For what fucking reason? Shock and awe is the reason. I really think this book was trying to be intellectual, and I don't think it succeeded in that. Granted, who am I to judge? Because again, I'm not an intellectual, but I just feel like this book was shitty. I feel like that's a shitty way to end a book. I really don't like when that is a cliffhanger for anything. There are a couple of books, sadly, that I've read with this ending, and I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? What are you doing? Yeah, truly, truly bad. Let's move on to the final book, shall we? A book from one of my British author nemesis, Miss Beth O'Leary. We have The No-Show, which is her newest title. And you know, it is not her fault that all of her books keep showing up on these like most anticipated romances lists on Goodreads. Like, it's not her fault, but I have to read these books, and I still want to talk about why I hated it. This book is about 3 women, and it opens up with all of them being stood up on Valentine's Day. What a day to be stood up, right? And we come to understand that these 3 seemingly unconnected women are actually connected by 2 things. One thing that's a spoiler that I can't mention. The other thing is the fact that the guy that they're stood up by is the same guy. It's not like 3 different men are sending these 3 different women up. They're being 3-timed by this man. Now, there are like a million things that I could bitch about with this book, which will spoil the book, so I won't really go there, but I will talk about the one thing that really irked me, shall we say. The one thing that I feel like was the glaring issue here, and that is the pitiful ass women in this book. Some of these women are justified in being so pathetic. However, I don't want to read a romance with 3 women who do not respect themselves. And yes, I understand the plot of this book hinges on these women not having enough respect for themselves to get out of a relationship with a guy who's 3-timing them. Honestly, like, who thought it was a good idea to write a book targeted at women about 3 women who don't respect themselves. Like, what a terrible lesson. What a terrible thing to put in front of women. I don't understand the logic here. It was so exhausting to read about, and I really wanted to hit all of these women over the head and tell them, hey, you deserve respect, you deserve more than this. And again, I guess this book hinges on them not questioning their poor treatment, but who wants to read a book about downtrodden, gullible individuals? Not I. I have no idea how to end this video, but those are the 6 books that I deeply disliked this year. I guess thankfully it was semi-challenging to put together this list. I did have more 1-star books this year than I've had in other years, but I think that's mostly because I am being a little bit more ruthless when it comes to 1 stars, not just rating everything 2 stars that I don't enjoy. So, you know, it was kind of easier this year, like going on my Goodreads and finding things, but I had a lot of good books this year that I read. I had a lot of 5-star reads. I think I had many more 5-star reads this year than last year. So, you know, that best books video, she's gonna be stacked and ready and full. The worst books, however, was not as stacked and full, and I think that's for the best. So I don't know, maybe you liked watching this. Maybe one of your favorite books of the year was completely torn to shreds. Let me know in the comments. Let me know what your worst book of the year was. Let me know if you enjoyed any of these books and you have differing opinions. I'd appreciate it if you didn't say that I didn't understand your favorite book, but you know, do what you will in the comments. I don't really care. Love y'all so much. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time.